Hello, friends. Welcome to ExpertsEdge, your one-stop solution to crack the CAT examination. My name is Neil Chaudhary, and I'll be helping you with the verbal section of your CAT examination. As you know, a major chunk of your CAT examination, especially the verbal section, is RC, or reading comprehension. You have 24 questions in all, out of which as many as 16 are RC. The 24 में से 16 question RC है आपका, which tells you that reading comprehension is by far the most important aspect for cracking the verbal section of your CAT examination, right? Now, as far as reading comprehension is concerned, guys, this is not something new that you're studying. Reading comprehension is something you've been studying since standard 5th. School में वो आता था, अगर आपको याद हो तो, section आता था English में, unseen passage. There used to be a section called the unseen passage in school. It's the same thing. Reading comprehension is almost the same thing, but the level has obviously improved. So if I talk in a nutshell, what does reading comprehension mean? You have some reading material with you and you have to comprehend it. Comprehend means to understand it. So read and understand exactly what you used to do in unseen passages. Right. Now, since we're preparing for CAT, which is obviously a competitive exam, the competition is higher and the level is higher. So preparation also has to be higher. So we will prepare at that level. हम थोड़ा level up करके पढ़ाई करेंगे, but basic ground rules remain the same. Reading comprehension, read a passage, answer questions based on it. What we've done for you in this series basically is, you see that says reading comprehension, and over here it says mapped. So you might be wondering, what is map? So we are mapping reading comprehension for you. It's like a roadmap for you to do well in the examination, your CAT examination. The do's and don'ts, how the smaller things, the finer things that you can take care of as far as reading comprehension is concerned. Now, if you see, this says main idea questions. What is the idea behind this? Let me explain you a little about the concept. So just, for example, you're preparing for quantitative aptitude, right? You'll start studying questions on TSD, or time, speed, distance. You'll do a number of questions based on TSD so that your grasp of that particular concept becomes stronger. Likewise, if you're studying games and tournaments, you do a number of questions on games and tournaments so that your grasp on that particular concept becomes stronger. That's what we're presenting to you as well. Rather than solving the entire RC as you do in a normal scenario, what we're going to do is, we're going to line up similar questions for you. So in this particular series, what we're going to do is, we're going to give you all main idea questions. So you can actually practice not only the RC, but a particular concept based on one particular idea. So we're only going to deal with main idea questions in this particular series, and then we'll do inference, then we'll do tone-based questions, so on and so forth. We'll cover all the questions, all the question types which CAT throws at you. As you can see, what we're going to do today is CAT PYQs. What does PYQ stand for? Previous year question. So we'll be taking a look at what all main idea questions were there in the previous year questions, and how do we tackle them. Now guys, I could tell you what is the right way of answering a question, or how to just go about what is the right answer. But rather than just giving you the right answer, I will also discuss how to eliminate answer choices. All right. Before I get there, let's see what are the kind of questions which refer to a main idea question, or what is the vocabulary which is used. You might have questions like primary purpose. What is the primary purpose of the passage? That's a main idea question. Primary concern. Again, a main idea question. The author's main concern, it's the same thing. You can also have a question which talks to you about what is a suitable title for the passage. So whenever you have such a question, you need to realize they're testing you on main idea. Okay, that's the concept they're testing. You could also be asked about the essence of the passage. There could be a question based on the conclusion of the passage as well. Right? So these are the types of questions which will all eventually be counted as a main idea question. Now, speaking of elimination, guys, there are 4 basic techniques that you need to remember, which is something which I've garnered over my experience. These are 4 typical traps that CAT examiners set for you. First, they will give you an answer which is out of scope, which will not be related to the question at all, which may be something you may have read in the passage, but it would not be pertaining to the question being asked. You could also have a question which talks about partial scope. What do I mean by partial scope? So it is human tendency. When you read a passage, there are a few words which you'll pick up from the passage, right? It is human tendency to be able to go ahead and pick those words out from the passage. So if I see a question, let's consider a main idea question. There's a main idea question, right? The main idea should be referring to the entirety of the passage. It cannot talk about one particular portion, right? It should talk about the entire passage. So what something would only partial scope would be something which is given in the passage, okay? So this is something mentioned in the passage, which you might say is actually something true as per the passage. मतलब passage में वो लिखा होगा, देख के आपको लगेगा हाँ ये लिखा था, मैंने कहीं पढ़ा था passage में. But आप देखेंगे तो वो it would not be covering the entire passage. It will be true as per the passage, but it will still not be the main idea. वो main idea नहीं होगा, right? That's only partial scope. जैसे कि मैंने कहा, हम जो पढ़ते हैं, we tend to pick out those words, right? So we tend to go with, okay, this is something that I read in the passage. Something opposite might also occur. So in the passage, if you see that India is a growing economy, and you remember India growing economy, and in the question you see India is not a growing economy, you might go like, oh, I read these words. I read growing economy, India. Yes, this rings a bell, and you might answer that question. This is again a trap. Then you can have something which is inconsistent. मतलब कुछ लेना देना ही नहीं है passage से उसका. Something which is completely irrelevant to what the passage is talking about. Right? So let's get on with RC. As I said, out of 24, 16 questions are RC. So this is something very, very important. And we'll start out with main idea question. What I have for you is 2022. Excuse me. What we're going to do today is PYQs, but the year will be 2022. There were 3 slots. Slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. We'll pick up one question from each slot. As I said, we're only dealing with the concept, we're dealing with the question. We're not going to solve a passage as you particularly solve the passage. Not the entire passage. We'll look at the passage and we'll try to find out the main idea question. Let's move to the first passage. Let's read the first passage for this CAT 22 slot 1. So there were 4 passages. We've only picked up one because we are basically discussing the main idea question type and not the passage per se. Okay, let's see how the passage unfolds. एक बार पढ़ लेते हैं इसको. I'll read it along with you and I'll keep explaining it, okay? This says, stories concerning the undead have always been with us. From out of the primal darkness of mankind's earliest years come whispers of eerie creatures, not quite alive, or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either. So they're somewhere in between. They're not dead and they're dead as well. And we're talking about eerie creatures. What do I mean by eerie? Scary, okay? Something which we fail to understand. These may have been ancient and primitive deities who dwelt deep in the surrounding forests and in remote places, or simply those deceased who refused to remain in their tombs and who wandered about the countryside, physically tormenting and frightening those who were still alive. Tombs basically आपका हुआ मकबरा, and those deceased who refused. आपने वो सुना बोलते हैं उसकी आत्मा को शांति नहीं मिली, आत्मा भटकती रहती है. This is something on the same lines. Who wandered about the countryside, physically tormenting and frightening those people who were still alive. So they used to scare people a lot. Mostly they were ill-defined, strange sounds in the night, beyond the comforting glow of the fire, or shapes half glimpsed in the twilight along the edge of an encampment. So strange sounds in the night. There is आप सोचिए आग जल रही है, पीछे से अजीब आवाजें आ रही हैं. Half glimpsed in the twilight along the edge of an encampment. कोई encampment है, आपने कैंप लगा रखा है, वहां से पीछे से आपको कोई सिलुएट या कोई आकृति दिखाई दे रही है. They were vague and indistinct. Vague is something which is not very clear, but they were always there with the power to terrify and disturb. तो वो हमेशा terrify करते थे और disturb करते थे. They had the power to touch the minds of our early ancestors and to fill them with dread. Such fears formed the basis of the earliest tales, through the source and exact nature of such terrors still remained vague. So they were tales, okay? And the exact nature, although the source and nature still remained vague. So we were not clear as to what they were, but they filled the ancestors with dread. And the earliest tales, मतलब उनकी कथाओं में आ गए थे, people used to talk about the undead. Okay. So the first paragraph, that's the first paragraph. We'll get back to it. And as mankind became more sophisticated, leaving the gloom of their caves and forming themselves into recognizable communities, towns, cities, whole cultures, so the undead traveled with them, inhabiting their folklore just as they had in former time. So, अब humankind थोड़ा evolve हुआ, sophisticated हुआ, towns बनने लगे, cities बनने लगे, cultures बनने लगे. पहले आदि मानव था, caveman, right? From the caveman we come to this town, cities, etc. Inhabiting their folklore. मतलब ये अब जो कहानियां बन रही हैं, अब भी folk tales जो है उसके भी part बन रहे थे, just as they had in former times. So you see, there we talk about earliest tales, and now we talk about the tales of now. Now they began to take on more definite shapes. Pehले they were ill-defined. Now they've taken more definite shapes. They became walking cadavers, the physical embodiment of former deities and things which had existed alongside man since the creation. Cadavers basically means dead bodies, skeletons, something like that. Some still remain vague and ill-defined, but as mankind strove to explain the horror, so abhi we are striving to explain the horror which it felt towards them, such creatures emerged more readily into light. So we're trying to explain them clearly, but they're coming more readily into light. Okay. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things: the power to transform themselves into other shapes, the ability to sustain themselves by drinking human blood, and the ability to influence human minds across a distance. So, in order to confirm their abnormal status, just to confirm what they are, they were accorded these attributes. मतलब ये अभी clear नहीं है कि ऐसा होता था या नहीं, लेकिन ऐसा कहा जाने लगा. So it came into existence. It started being told to people that this is what they do. They start drinking human blood, they influence human minds across the distance, so on and so forth. Such powers, described as supernatural, only lent an added dimension to the terror that humans felt regarding them. तो पहले से ही थोड़ा डरते थे उनसे, अब और ज्यादा डरने लगे. Okay. And it was only natural too that the undead should become connected with the practice of magic. So, मतलब no surprises here. If they became, connected with the practice of magic. From very early times, shamans and witch doctors had claimed at least some power and control over the spirits of departed ancestors, And this has continued into more civilized times. So from very early times, shamans are basically people who are very spiritual, tantric sort of log hote hain. Shamans and witch doctors. At late nifty, some power and control of the spirits have departed. This is continued down into more civilized times. तो पहले ऐसा होता था और अभी भी ऐसा होता आ रहा है. So this is continued into more civilized times. Formerly, the invisible spirits and forces that thronged around men's earliest encampments had spoken through the tribal shamans, but now, as entities in their own right, they were subject to magical control and could physically be summoned by a competent sorcerer. बोलते ना, we call the spirit, कोई अच्छा sorcerer है तो they can call the spirit. You must have seen pagan worship, etc. However, the relationship between the magician and an undead creature was often a very tenuous and uncertain one. So, often very uncertain, tenuous. Tenuous is something which can break very easily. Some sorcerers might have even become undead entities when they died. तो हम क्या बोल रहे हैं, कुछ तांत्रिक भी ऐसी भटक रहे होंगे. But they might also have been susceptible to the powers of other magicians when they did. तो और लोग भी मैजिक करते होंगे. So ये susceptible मतलब vulnerable to the powers of other magicians. From the Middle Ages and into the Age of Enlightenment, theories of the undead continue to grow and develop. Their names became more familiar: werewolf, vampire, ghoul, each one certain to strike fear in the hearts of ordinary humans. So I know it's a main idea question, guys. There is something I would like to recommend, okay? Not just for the main idea question, but this goes out for almost every question that you do, and not just in the VA section, everywhere. I would recommend that you start with the practice of pre-thinking. What do you mean by pre-thinking? As the name suggests, pehle sochna. So before you look at the answer choices, try and form an answer in your own head. Try and figure out what the answer might be to this particular question, and then go ahead with the answer. If I have to take a look at the main idea, let's see. We said more sophisticated, leaving the gloom of their caves. In the first passage, we talk about the undead. In the second passage, we said how the status has developed. In the third paragraph, we say the undead should become connected with the practice of magic. And it has continued down into more civilized times. So from early primal times to more civilized time. In the last paragraph, you can see from the Middle Ages and into the age of enlightenment, the theories of undead continue to grow and develop. So what is the main idea? The main idea is basically, if I would recommend, is the evolution of the theories about the undead from earlier times to now. Which one of the following statements best describes what the passage is about? So it is a main idea question. Describes what the passage is about. Right? Pre-thinking hum kar chuke already. Let's see what the answer choices are. A says the passage discusses the evolution of theories of the undead from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. Yes, we already agreed with this. And hence, I'm going to mark this as my answer. Okay, let's not just mark this as my answer. Let's take a look at the other choices as well, because as I discussed, we will take a look at all the choices. The passage discusses the evolution of theories of the undead from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. B says the passage describes the failure of human beings to fully comprehend their environment. So the passage describes the failure of human beings to fully comprehend their environment. It talks about the failure of human beings, and it does say that they were not able to comprehend their environment. But this is only partially correct. This is not the main idea. Okay. C says the writer discusses the transition from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. हम बोल रहे हैं पहले से लेके अब तक thinking कैसे change हुई है? Are we saying transition from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment? Are we talking about thought per se? No. We're specifically talking about the undead, right? This is also this is also a discourse. B says the writer describes the ways in which the undead come to be associated with shamans and the practice of magic. So yes, this is again partially true. This is mentioned in the passage that the writer describes the ways in which the undead come to be associated with shamans and the practice of magic. But that again is not the main idea. Your clear answer has to be option A. Let's look at the main idea question for CAT 2022, slot 2. Let's read the passage first. We begin with the emergence of the philosophy of the social sciences as an arena of thought and a set of social institutions. Guys, what do you understand by an institution? An institution is a large organization which has a specific set of purpose. Okay? We need to understand what an institution is to properly understand what the passage is talking about. My two characterizations overlap but are not congruent. So they overlap as in there is some crisscross but exactly same nahi hai. They are similar but not same. Academic disciplines are social institutions. My view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize actions. They link acting individuals into social structures. That's what I said. Author's view is that institutions are all those entities that organize action, right? So they have a specific purpose. उनका एक purpose होता है. They link acting individuals into social structures. Okay. There are various kinds of institutions. Hegelians and Marxists, these are basically Hegel and Marx. Karl Marx were two sociologists. So the people who follow their ideologies are known as Hegelians and Marxists. जो उनकी ideology follow करते हैं उनको Hegelians, जैसे गांधीवादी होता है, गांधी जो गांधीन follow करते हैं, something similar. Hegelians and Marxists emphasize universal institutions such as the family, rituals, governance, economy, and the military. These are mostly institutions that just grew. Perhaps in some imaginary beginning of time, they spontaneously appeared. In their present incarnations, incarnation is basically an avatar, matlab, to come back again. In the present incarnation, however, they are very much the product of conscious attempts to mold and plan them. Okay, to mold and plan them. How do we mold and plan them? Let's see. We have family law for family. We have established and disestablished churches for rituals. We have constitutions and laws for governance, so on and so forth, including those governing and the economy and the military. तो यहाँ से इनको आपने relate कर दिया. Family, military, and we have family law and this. Okay. Institutions deriving from statute. Statute basically refers to a law. Institutions deriving from statute like joint stock companies are formal by contrast with informal ones such as friendships. There are some institutions that come in both informal and formal variants as well as in mixed ones. Consider the fact that the stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions, one formal, one not. Consider further that there are many features of the work of the stock exchange that rely on informal, non-codifiable agreements, not least the language used for communication. So we first defined what are institutions, then we go on to define various kinds of institutions, right? Okay. To be precise, mixtures are the norm. From constitutions at the top to bylaws near the bottom, we are always adding to or tinkering with earlier institutions. So mixtures are the norm. We're either adding or tinkering. Tinkering is to change. Chhedchhad karna. With earlier institutions, the grown and the designed are intertwined. They are interlinked. It is usually a social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from, although alongside, institutions. The view taken here is different. Culture and tradition are subsets of institutions analytically isolated for explanatory or expository purposes. So we are not saying they are the same, but we're saying they are subsets of institutions. culture, and tradition. Okay. Some social scientists have taken all institutions, even purely local ones, to be entities that satisfy basic human needs under local conditions. So some scientists do what? They have considered all institutions to be entities that satisfy basic human needs under local conditions. Other scientists or others differed and declared any structural or reciprocal roles and norms and institution. Most of these differences are differences of emphasis rather than disagreements. Let us straddle all these versions and present institutions very generally. Straddlers bring together and present institutions very generally as structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. Institutions themselves have no aim or purpose other than those given to them by actors or used by actors to explain them. So if you see what has happened so far, in the first paragraph, the author tells us what an institution is, then goes on to define different kinds of institutions. In the second paragraph, the author tells us that different scientists have different explanations as to what an institution comprises of. And then the author presents a very general presentation of an institution as structures that serve to coordinate the actions of human individuals. If you see, this is something similar to what is said in the first paragraph right here. You see where I'm marking it? My view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize action. They link acting individual into social structure. So all in all, the author is trying to define what an institution is. Language is the formative institution for social life and for science. Both formal and informal language is involved, naturally grown or designed. Language is all of those to varying degrees. Languages are paradigms of institutions, or from another perspective, nested sets of institutions. Syntax, semantics, lexicon, and alphabet character set are all institutions within the larger institutional framework of written language. So if I talk about language, we're saying this is also a formative institution, and then syntax, semantics, lexicon, alphabet character, these are all part of this institution. Natural languages are a typical example of what Ferguson called the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. It's said by Adam Ferguson. Reformed natural languages and artificial languages introduce design into the modifications or refinements of natural language. Above all, languages are paradigms of institutional tools that function to coordinate. So in the last paragraph, we go talking about language, how language is also an institution, and how languages are paradigms of institutional tools. Paradigm basically means a set, an example of, okay? So again, as we do so, this is the main idea question. We've done our pre-thinking already, I think. What is the main idea? The main idea tells us as to what the purpose of an institution is, how do you define an institution, right? Let's look at the question. Which of the following statements best represents the essence of the passage? A says institutions are structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. I think this is a pretty good answer. Right here. Structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. So we've gone on to say, this is what an institution does. This is what an institution always does. In the first paragraph also it says, my view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize action. They link acting individuals into social structures. And let's look at what the first option says. Institutions are structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. I would go with this. This is the essence of the passage. So main idea of the passage, right? B says it is usual in social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from institutions. Now this is something which is mentioned. See, in the first line of the second paragraph. Right? It is mentioned. But is it the main idea of the passage? No. It's a distortion. This is just partially correct. It is true as per the passage, but it is not the main idea or not the essence of the passage. C says language is the fundamental formal institution for social life and for science. C is also mentioned. See the first line of the last paragraph. Again, something which is true as per the passage, but is it the main idea? No. Does it represent the passage in its entirety? No. The stock exchange and black market are both market institutions. This is also mentioned. The stock market and the black market are both market institutions. But this is only giving you an example of what an institution is, right? So D is also true as per the passage. But what are we looking for? We're looking for the main idea. And I said the main idea should talk about the passage as a whole. The only option which fits in is option A. Let's read this passage, which is from slot 3, CAT 2022, focusing on the main idea question. Sociologists working in the Chicago school tradition have focused on how rapid or dramatic social change causes increases in crime. So if we're saying social change increases in crime, okay? Just as Durkheim, Marx, Stoinis, and other European sociologists thought that the rapid changes produced by industrialization and urbanization produced crime and disorder, so too did the Chicago school theorists. So we're saying industrialization and urbanization produce crime and disorder. But what are Chicago school theorists saying? They are saying that social change, a rapid, dramatic or social change also increases the rate in crime. The location of the University of Chicago provided an excellent opportunity for Park, Verghese and Mackenzie to study the social ecology of the city. Shaw and Mackay found that areas of the city characterized by high levels of social disorganization had higher rates of crime and delinquency. Higher levels of social disorganization had higher rates of crime and delinquency. What do you mean by delinquency? Delinquency is not following the rules, right? In the 1920s and 1930s, Chicago, like many American cities, experienced considerable immigration. So what is immigration? Immigration is when people are coming into your country from somewhere, some other country, right? Rapid population growth is a disorganizing influence, but growth resulting from in migration of very different people is particularly disruptive. So what we're saying is rapid population growth is disorganizing. So अगर population grow कर रही है तो वो disorganizing influence है. But growth resulting from in-migration of very different people is more disruptive. So what is more disruptive? If people are coming in from other countries. So population growth is disruptive, but people coming in from other countries is even more disruptive. Chicago's in-migrants were both native-born whites and blacks from rural areas and small towns and foreign immigrants. So in Chicago, there were both native-born whites, blacks of rural areas and small towns and foreign immigrants. So obviously, this would be particularly disruptive. The heavy industry cities like Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh drew those seeking opportunities and new lives. Obviously, this happens everywhere. जहाँ पे भी industries होंगी लोग वहीं भागेंगे. So was the case with Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. Farmers and villagers from America's hinterland, like the European cousins of whom Durkheim wrote, moved in large numbers into cities. Hinterland is rural area, or जो गाँव होता है, villages, right? They started moving into large numbers to cities. And obviously, what were they looking for? They were looking for better job opportunities, higher salaries. At the start of the 20th century, Americans were predominantly a rural population. But by the century's midpoint, most lived in urban areas. So what are we saying? At the beginning of the 20th century, they were predominantly a rural population, and most of them lived in villages. What are we saying? 20th century is 1900s. But by the century's midpoint or 1950s, most people lived in urban areas, then moved to cities. So this is the key factor, rapid population growth is the disorganizing influence. Excuse me. But from in-migration, it's particularly disruptive. Okay. And then we go on to say Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh saw a lot of migration. The social lives of these migrants, as well as those already living in the cities they moved to, were disrupted by the differences between urban and rural life. So now what are we saying? The social lives of these migrants, as well as those already living in the cities they moved to, were disrupted by the differences between urban and rural life. City life और गांव की life में फर्क होगा, right? According to social disorganization theory, again we're talking about the theory. Social disorganization theory. Until the influence of social ecology of the new place can adapt, this rapid changes criminogenic influence. Criminogenic matlab something which gives rise to crime. So what we're saying is, if there is a lot of migration, if there is a lot of migration, then the new place will be a new place for all those migrants. If they can adapt, probably crime will be stopped. Otherwise, it will increase in crime. But most rural migrants and even many of the foreign immigrants to the city looked like and eventually spoke the same language as the natives of the city into which they moved. Okay. So these similarities, you see similar हो गए. These similarities allowed for more rapid social integration. Obviously, similarities होंगी तो disorganization नहीं होगा. Disorganization तब होगा when there are a lot of differences. For example, differences between urban and rural life. There's an example. This is something that will lead to social disorganization. Then that was the case for African Americans and most foreign immigrants. In the same decades, America experienced what has been called the Great Migration, the massive movement of African Americans out of the rural South and into northern and some southern cities. So African Americans, blacks were moving in. The scale of this migration is one of the most dramatic in human history. These migrants, unlike their white counterparts, were not integrated into the cities they now called home. So read the language here, okay? These migrants, unlike their white counterparts, were not integrated into the cities. So in a way, what are we saying? The white counterparts were integrated into the cities. उनको adapt करवा दिया था. These migrants were not accepted. In fact, most American cities at the end of the 20th century were characterized by high levels of racial residential segregation. Racial residential, why? Because you have white counterparts and you have African Americans. So, different races, different colors, racial residential segregation. Failure to integrate these migrants, coupled with other forces of social disorganization such as crowding, poverty, and illness, caused crime rates to climb in the cities, particularly in the segregated wards and neighborhoods where the migrants were forced to live. So again, social disorganization is being spoken of. इस वजह से हुआ crowding, poverty, illness. This made crime rates climb. So far, we've come to a solution that social disorganization will lead to an increase in crime rate. Okay. Foreign immigrants during this period did not look as dramatically different from the rest of the population as blacks did. But the migrants from Eastern and Southern Europe who came to America, American cities did not speak English and were frequently Catholic, while the native born were mostly Protestant. So what are we saying? Foreign immigrant side did not look dramatically different, but other migrants did not speak English, leading again to social disorganization. If you remember, we spoke about that the same language was a barrier which connected them. The combination of rapid population growth with the diversity of those moving into the cities created social disorganization, which, as we can say, eventually led to crime. So in a nutshell, what are we saying? Social disorganization leads to crime. Right? That's the nutshell. That's in a nutshell. Now, let's take a look at the question. A fundamental conclusion by the author. Right? Again, what are we going to do? We're going to pre-think. But I think we've already done that. The crux of the matter is social disorganization leads to crime. Right? It says the best circumstances of crime to flourish are when there are several racial disparities. See, this is misleading. Racial disparities have been mentioned, but nowhere does it say that this is the best circumstances of crime to flourish. Okay? Racial disparities may lead to social disorganization, which may lead to crime in turn, but it's not the best circumstance. B says to prevent crime, it is important to maintain social order through maintaining social segregation. Guys, don't you agree? This is going against the very, fabric of the passage. ये बोल रहा है कि आपको social order maintain करना है, तो there should be social segregation, which will eventually lead to social disorganization, which will lead to a higher amount of crime. We can't say that this will help crime. C says, according to European sociologists, crime in America is mainly in Chicago. We had mentioned Chicago. We spoke about Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Detroit being the hub where industrialization was increasing. But the passage nowhere mentions that crime in America is mainly in Chicago. That's not mentioned in the passage. Let's look at D. D says rapid population growth and demographic diversity give rise to social disorganization that can feed the growth of crime. That's what we discussed. Even if you look at the last paragraph, rapid population and diversity created social disorganization. And the passage talks about social disorganization leading to crime. Thereby, D is my best answer. Rapid population, demographic diversity leads to social disorganization, which will eventually lead to growth of crime.